start with just a brief reminder for everybody of some of the problems that the reforms are intended to deal with. You know, why is it that we need to make these big changes? I don't feel I really need to dwell on that with people in this room. You know more about that than me, I think. And the messages about parents having to struggle to get their voice heard, to get the help their children need, I think has come through loud and clear, and ministers have absolutely heard that. And I know similarly, Parent Carer Forums and the National Network have been really powerful advocates for change. And I think in that process of shaping the reforms, you really have had your voice heard. I'll just give a couple of examples of the ways in which that has happened. I think I'd refer specifically to the new rights for parent carers to have an assessment in the Children and Families Act 2014. I think that's very much reflecting some of the messages that have come through from your work. And similarly, the importance of that voice and those rights for young people, again reflecting what we've heard from you as a group. So, I also just briefly thought we'd just remind ourselves about the aims of the reforms. Again, familiar territory. But here I think the important message is that we want all children and young people to achieve well, to fulfil their potential, whatever their potential may be. So that very strong, inclusive message that underlies the special educational needs and disability reforms. And I just have a look at that quote from Dominic Slowey, which I think captures things really well. And Dominic, some people may know Dominic, he's the National Clinical Director in NHS England responsible for learning disability. And he's also, and equally importantly, he's the father of a young woman with a learning disability. And I think Dominic's message here about moving towards a more inclusive and less disabling society is absolutely central. Just moving on to the Children and Families Act itself, and a reminder about the key principles in the Act, which really seek to embed and enshrine the importance of parental participation, of making sure that the views, wishes and feelings of children, young people and parents are central to the way in which local authorities work, and the importance of supporting and enabling participation in decision making. I do think that is a significant move forward. I think it's something people here have been fighting for a long while. We've got to see how it goes in practice, but the law is really supporting it now. And I think it's encouraging. We're seeing some early signs of progress, I think. I think the independent evaluation from the Pathfinder authorities we published in August shows some of that evidence. I think we've seen some really good impact from individual parent carer forums. And similarly, I also heard some really good examples from individual parents at the meeting with the Minister in September, where people were talking about some of the early changes they've already started to see. So, good and encouraging, more to do, of course. As we move forward, clearly the journey of change is one that is a long-term piece of work. This isn't going to change that's going to happen overnight. It's about hard work by everybody on the ground, people in this room, everyone playing their part. I think the quote on the slide from Corey, the young person, really does sum it up well. It's about, it will take time, patience and resource to move us forward. And of course, one of the key things is the transition arrangements for children and young people who already have statements in the system, moving them over to education, health and care plans in a meaningful way. It's obviously very important that support, those entitlements continue through that process. And what we are doing is seeking to work carefully with local authorities, so there is a planned approach. Local authorities are required to publish their transition plans for the end of September. That was yesterday, so we're looking to see how that's gone. And then we as the department, while we want to make sure that there's real local flexibility, we've also set some clear milestones in terms of timing for transition, which I think will help people. It's important to have some clear markers, I think, set down for that. That work is starting. There will be, and it's really important, that there is support available for families. We're funding and engaging in lots of ways to make that happen. One element of that is, of course, the work of the independent supporters. It's not the only one, but it is an important source of support. And I guess I'd be really welcome from you today feedback, both on how the independent supporters arrangements are starting to go, but also on transition issues generally. So that might be one of the things we pick up on. So, I said at the beginning I'd talk about a couple of key themes in terms of moving forward on implementation. The first of my themes is changes for young people aged 16 and over. And I'm highlighting that because I think this is one of the biggest ways in which the reforms should be making a difference. It's one of the areas in which there is really significant change, with both new entitlements for young people and also new duties on further education and other providers. For the first time, there's the equivalent of the statement biting on FE providers. That's quite a significant change. It is going to take a while for it all to bed in. I think, and Amanda was telling me, it's one of the things that's coming through from the Contact a Family helpline quite significantly. I know parents want more advice and information on it. We are doing quite a lot of work to make sure there are materials and information out there. Obviously, both through the code, we put some special materials out as a guide to FE providers. And we've been working very closely with our young people's group, who we call EPIC, to make sure that their voice is really embedded in all of this. But this is going to be an area, it's one to watch, there's going to be more work to do going forwards, I think. And then the second of my key themes going forward is working with health. And already this morning I've heard people around the table saying, working with health partners is quite a challenge locally. I wasn't surprised to hear that, because I think moving forward with health is going to be one of the areas that we really need to focus on. Again, the legal framework does move us forward significantly. I think people here will know that for the first time there are duties on the health service to deliver the health element of the Education, Health and Care Plan. So that's a significant move forward. There are also new duties in terms of joint commissioning of services. And the CARE Act, the DH-led piece of legislation, puts duties on health and social care in terms of cooperation with children's services. And also the NHS mandate, which sets the priorities for the NHS, makes a significant mention of the special educational needs and disability reforms. So we've got some important building blocks in place, and we've been working hard with the Department of Health to communicate that and to put in place support for CCGs and health professionals so that they're aware of what's going on. There are, for example, some conferences that are happening over the next couple of months across the country, working with the Council for Disabled Children aimed at the health system. So there's lots going on, but I think we're starting, I think it's fair to say, in some areas from a fairly low base. So that there is a lot to do to move us forward in terms of building up knowledge and awareness in the health system. And again, I think this is one of the areas where feedback from you, feedback into the department will be really helpful. It came through when the National Network met Edward Timpson, and I think it will be really helpful for the National Network to meet directly with NHS England and the Department of Health, and that's something that we in DFE will make sure happens. So those are a couple of my key themes. In the last bit of my presentation, I just wanted to say something about the ongoing work that we in government are doing to support, monitor and challenge the implementation of the reforms. There is lots of activity underway, and we're trying to get that balance right between support and information and advice, and then monitoring and challenge to make sure we know what's going on in practice. So we've obviously got lots of activity through our voluntary sector partners, the work of the local authority champions who come from the Pathfinders, and our published materials. Funding is in the system to support local authorities with implementation for this year, and we've made an announcement about an indicative amount for next year. That has to be confirmed, but you know, there are some figures in the system. There's a big role, obviously, for the voluntary sector here, and we will be saying more, we hope, very shortly about the future of funding in those areas too. So we've got a good base there, and at the same time, what we're doing is gathering information about how implementation is going on the ground in practice. So we are about to send out a further implementation survey to local authorities. There'll be a survey to parent care forums as well, and Sue's been working actively with Patrick on the design of that. We really value that survey from parent care forums because it enables us to check the information that we're getting in from other sources. So we look at it alongside what the local authority said, and also alongside what we see from our performance data about, you know, some of the markers of what's going on in the system. For example, the time it takes to do certain things, or levels of appeal to the tribunal. So it's a really helpful piece of information for us. And then how we use it is that we have a team of advisors headed by Andre Imick. Some people may have met Andre, and they are going out, working with local authorities, having individual meetings, phone calls, reviewing where things are, challenging the evidence, bringing that back into the department so that we have really up-to-date intelligence about what's going on, and we're able to challenge when we need to challenge. So that's the system that we've got at the moment, and your role in that is really helpful. And that, of course, is also supported by a lot of communications activity. There's been a lot going on, both directly from government in terms of lots of materials and information. The code is one of the big pieces of that, obviously. Huge amounts of activity through the voluntary sector, through our funding delivery partners, producing loads of materials, and also enormous amounts of social media activity. And you know, we really do value the work that the National Network and Sharon in particular have been doing in terms of that tweeting and retweeting. It's a good way, I know it's a good way of getting out key nuggets of information to people. So, you know, lots of that going on, really helpful. What I think we know we need to do is to get smarter with our communications activity. You might say there's an awful lot of material. Is it really sort of presented in the best way for people? Is there too much? Is it too technical? So we need to really know what is it that parents find helpful, what is it young people find helpful, how can we get this better? So again, one of the areas where we really welcome feedback, because communication to be effective is obviously about two-way communication, isn't it? And we're inviting those comments in. I said at the beginning I'd talk about how we're going forward. And I hope you can tell from what I've said already, there's lots of activity underway. The Department for Education will continue to play a key role. Absolutely not walking away now that the new legislation is out there and the changes are being implemented. There are a number of things we're seeking to do. I've talked about communications and feedback. I've talked a little bit about addressing blockers in the system, but there may be other areas you feel we should be picking up under that heading too. And I've talked quite a lot about working with partners. The one area I'm just going to highlight now is the work that we're doing to define and implement a challenge and accountability framework. So I've talked a bit about how we're surveying what's going on in terms of implementation and all the activity through partners. What we're also wanting to do is thinking a bit longer term, is to develop an effective way of measuring outcomes and impact from the changes of the reforms that people can use locally and nationally. We want to think about what are the most effective indicators which focus both on outcomes for children and young people, also for families, parents and families, carers, experience of the system. Those are some of the really key areas, as well as preparing young people effectively for adult life and getting the best value out of all the resources in the system. So that's work that we're really starting. We will be involving our implementation group, our partners, and again, I think it's one of the areas that we'll want to draw in the national network to take advantage of your views and expertise. So that's going to be a critical thing going forward. And then I just thought I'd leave you at the end with a final slide that just shows some of the key milestones. This is far from comprehensive, but it shows some of the key things that we've got underway this autumn with, as I said, further surveys going on. We expect some outcomes from Ofsted from the work they did earlier in the year, looking at what's going on in local areas. We're going to publish a further easy read guide. And then looking ahead to next spring, some important milestones in terms of pieces of the legislation coming into effect on young offenders and parent carers, and then longer term, a managed process for transition from statements and LDAs to education, health and care plans. So you've got a process of change really going on over several years here. And I guess I think that's probably enough for me in terms of the initial input. I hope that's been helpful in terms of giving an overview. And as I say, really welcome your views, comments and feedback on all of that. Thank you.